some of the best bands of the 1960s, the ones who shaped the sound of rock, soul, and psychedelia. The bands whose songs still give you chills, but who never got the credit they deserved, were quietly left in the shadows while others stole the spotlight. Today, we're dusting off the vinyl and cranking up the most underrated bands of the 1960s. Let's get into it. 10. The Zombies.
I know she's the kind of girl that throw my love away.
Everyone remembers Time of the Season now, but when the Zombies released their 1968 masterpiece, Odessey and Oracle,
well, let me tell you about the way she looked, the way she acted.
Nobody cared. The album barely sold, the band broke up, and only years later did people realize how brilliant it was. Songs like Care of Cell 44 had Beatles-level songwriting and lush harmonies, but without the marketing muscle of bigger acts, they got buried. Ironically, Time of the Season became a huge hit after they'd already split. It's wild. One of the best psychedelic pop albums of the 60s was ignored at release. Talk about underrated. 9. The Pretty Things.
Midnight 6, midnight 6.
If you thought the Rolling Stones had an edge, the Pretty Things were even raw. Their early singles like Rosalind and Don't Bring Me Down were garage rock before garage rock even had a name. But here's where they really blew minds. In 1968, they released SF Sorrow, one of the first true rock concept albums. And yes, it beat The Who's Tommy to the punch. Songs like Bracelets of Fingers and Private Sorrow laid the groundwork for psychedelic storytelling in rock. But since they weren't as commercially polished as their peers, they never broke through to superstardom. They were innovators. But history gave their credit to other bands. 8. The Sonics. If punk started in the 70s, then the Sonics were the blueprint a decade earlier. Their 1965 album, Here Are the Sonics, was loud, dirty, and aggressive in a way that made other rock bands sound tame. Listen to The Witch or Psycho.
'Cause she's the witch.
Those songs were gritty, primal, and absolutely feral compared to the polished pop dominating AM radio. The Sonics never hit mainstream success, but their raw sound influenced everyone from the Stooges to Nirvana. They were too wild for the 60s, but decades ahead of their time. 7. Love. Arthur Lee's band Love might be the ultimate cult 60s group. Their 1967 album Forever Changes is now hailed as one of the greatest records of all time, but back then, it barely made a dent. Tracks like Alone Again and More Again combined psychedelic rock with horns and orchestral arrangements. It was strange, haunting, and brilliant. But Love never toured much. Arthur Lee didn't play the fame game, and so they slipped into obscurity while bands like Jefferson Airplane exploded. Today, though, musicians revere Love. If you've never given Forever Changes a spin, you're missing out. 6. The Yardbirds. It's crazy to call a band underrated when they had 3 of the greatest guitarists in history, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. But here's the thing, the Yardbirds never got the respect they deserved in their own time. Songs like Shapes of Things and Over, Under, Sideways, Down were psychedelic, experimental, and absolutely groundbreaking. They invented the rave-up sound that influenced psychedelic and hard rock. But because they were constantly in transition, losing members, changing direction, they never built the solid identity that the Stones or the Who had. By the time Jimmy Page took over, the band dissolved, and out of its ashes, Led Zeppelin was born. So yeah, history remembers Zeppelin, but the Yardbirds, criminally underrated. 5. The Hollies. Sure, you know, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. But the Hollies were way more than just that one sentimental hit. Songs like Bus Stop, Carrie Ann, and Look Through Any Window showed off harmonies every bit as rich as the Beatles and the Beach Boys. Yet, for some reason, they were never put in the same league. Part of it was timing. Graham Nash left to form Crosby, Stills and Nash, and suddenly the Hollies seemed like the band that almost made it. But listen again. Their catalog is stacked with perfect pop rock gems. Here's 4. The Electric Prunes. Yes, the name makes people laugh, but musically, the Electric Prunes were ahead of their time. Their 1966 single, I Had Too Much to Dream, Last Night, was pure psychedelic fuzz, a song that captured the acid-soaked vibe of the decade before most bands had even figured it out. Later, their Mass in F minor album fused psychedelic rock with orchestral religious themes. It was bizarre, yes, but also daring. They were one of those bands that critics dismissed, but other musicians quietly admired. If you love 60s psych, the Electric Prunes deserve a second listen. 3. The Monks. Here's a band that barely anyone in the U.S. heard in the 60s, but in Europe, they were something else. The Monks were American GIs stationed in Germany, and they formed a band that was totally unlike anything else. Their 1966 album Black Monk Time featured pounding drums, repetitive chants, and raw energy that sounded like punk rock a decade early. Songs like Monk Time and I Hate You were jagged, aggressive, and completely uncommercial. No wonder the mainstream ignored them. But later on, the Monks became cult heroes, influencing post-punk and garage revival bands. They were too strange for the 60s, but perfect for later generations. 2. The Small Faces. While The Who were smashing guitars, the Small Faces were quietly creating some of the finest British rock of the 60s. Songs like Itchy Coo Park and Tin Soldier were psychedelic pop at its finest. Then came their 1968 concept album, Ogden's Nut Gone Flake, which combined Cockney humor, psychedelic jams, and storytelling. It's an album people in Britain still rave about, but in America, the Small Faces never broke through. Maybe it was poor promotion, maybe timing, but they deserved way more recognition than they got. Fun fact, members later formed the band Faces with Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood, who went on to the Rolling Stones. Number 1. The Kinks. Yes, the Kinks had hits. You Really Got Me. All Day and All of the Night. But compared to the Beatles and Stones, they were constantly overlooked. Ray Davies wrote some of the sharpest, most observational songs of the decade. Waterloo Sunset is practically poetry set to music. Sunny Afternoon nailed Britain's post-war malaise. And Victoria captured national identity like no one else. But here's the kicker. The Kinks were banned from touring in the U.S. for years because of a musicians' union dispute. That killed their chances at being as big as their British invasion peers. So while the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, the Kinks were stuck in the UK. And that's why today, despite their brilliance, they're still criminally underrated compared to their peers. And there you have it, the most underrated bands of the 1960s. These weren't just filler acts in the shadow of the Beatles and Stones. They were innovators, risk-takers, and in many cases, the real architects of the sounds we still love today. Underrated doesn't mean forgotten, it just means they deserve a second listen. So here's my challenge. This week, pick one band from this list and put on a full album. Don't just stick with the singles, immerse yourself. You'll be surprised how fresh and timeless this underrated music still sounds. If you enjoyed this trip through 60s music history, hit like, smash that subscribe button, and ring the bell so you never miss a deep dive into the songs and stories that shaped our world. Now your turn. What's the most underrated band of the 1960s in your opinion? Drop it below, and let's see which band gets the most love in the comments.